Everyone, we are glad to have you in this class for this session. In this session, we are discussing the concept of rural development. That is the focus of this session. So, we have also, as usual, set out targets and expectations for every participant. Please, we want to again emphasize that it is ideal that you do your personal self-evaluation before the teacher comes in to evaluate you. Of course, your own evaluation from the teacher may come in the form of inception quiz, mid-semester, and then the end of the semester exams. But then, for every section in this series, we want to advise, especially for those that are not students who are just going through this lecture series to acquire relevant knowledge in their various fields. We want to advise that you please, on your own, do a self evaluation. When you do your evaluation, we want you to focus on asking yourself such questions as: am I able to define rural development? Of course, for this session, do I clearly understand the idea of rural development? Of course, we can only say you've been able to grab the understanding if you can explain this idea to a little pupil or maybe a secondary school student without coming back to listen to this first. Then you should be able to ask yourself, can I list the objectives of rural development? And then beyond listing these objectives, do I understand the objectives that I've listed? You should be able to ask yourself whether you understand the tools for data collection in rural sociology. And then if you don't, why are you having challenges with understanding these tools? You should be able to list those tools and then know how to do rural survey, how to collect empirical data, interpret data in the course of your rural survey. So we go from there. We go from there, everyone. Please move with us now as we take the first part of this discourse in defining rural development. We define rural development as the improvement of sustainable livelihoods of rural dwellers with careful attention paid to local characteristics. Let's break this down. First of all, when we say development, it connotes improvement. There can be any development if there is no improvement. Otherwise, what we would have is a retardation. But then, rural development is not just an improvement per se. It's not just the idea of anyhow improvement, but rather, rural development is talking about sustainable improvement. Those that were present when we did introduction to agricultural extension will remember that we discussed the issues revolving around sustainable development. You recall in that class we made effort to define sustainable development as that development that facilitates the optimal use of resources for the present without jeopardizing, without threatening the availability of these resources for future use. So, rural development looks at this improvement in the livelihood of rural dwellers in such a manner that those who currently live in rural areas are able to harness and then use resources in such a manner that it will not threaten the availability of these resources for future generations. Then We also have in this definition the concept of local characteristics. We do not support careless importation of development goals and ideas and approaches from various areas and then imposing them on the rural people. We do not commend that. So we are emphasizing by this definition that the development we are talking about among the rural people, for it to be ideally identified as rural development, then it must pay careful attention to local characteristics. These local characteristics were part of the things we discussed in the scope of rural sociology. It has to do with their religious life, it has to do with their economic life, their social life, everything that is specific and unique to the rural people. Of course, we know there is no one size fits all for all the rural communities. So each rural area would possibly have their own local characteristic. So we expect the development agency and partners, some of whom you will be working with, to factor in these differences. Now, we want to go further to also discuss agricultural development, because agri development is essential for rural development. Oftentimes, people think or mix up agri development with rural development. While rural development is a holistic approach which factors in several other aspects of the rural life, um, that does not just limit itself to agricultural development. Agricultural development, on the other hand, aims just at increasing agricultural products that will include crops, livestock, and fish. In agri development, human being, land, and capital are simply regarded as production goods and means. They are simply seen as factors of production. Now, that is different from rural development, which targets on people and institutions. So, rural development includes agricultural development activities. However, agri development itself, within agricultural development itself, is just one of the means of economic revitalization for active farmers and targeted rural villages. So please be careful enough to observe the difference between rural development and agricultural development. Be careful enough. Remember, we said rural development is holistic. It involves other aspects of rural infrastructure, including rural health, rural economy, rural social life, etc. But agri development is specifically targeting agricultural production. Rural development, therefore, is very different from agri development, even though they go hand in hand. What we are saying in summary about rural development is that it involves efforts that are economic and social in nature, intended to encourage concepts of retention, growth, and expansion in areas outside cities, including improving the quality of life for rural residents through agricultural activities. All right, thank you very much. We'll look at the objectives of rural development. The main objectives of rural development within the context of this lecture will include enhanced production and productivity in the rural areas. Now, this enhanced production and productivity in the rural areas does not just target agriculture, but all round production and productivity, which will include health, which will include educational, among others. So, rural development aims at ensuring that production and productivity in the rural areas is enhanced. Also, further, it also goes further to ensure that there is more socio-economic equity. Please note that here we're not talking about equality, we're talking about equity. Um, we have emphasized that what sociology aims is at gender equity and not gender equality. In gender equality, proponents insist that everyone be given 50-50, whether they have capacity or not. But in equity, what we insist in gender equity and social equity is that people be given responsibilities and privileges in line with their capacity. Now, part of the objectives of rural development also is to ensure that there is spatial balance in social and economic development. And then finally, there is the need for improvement in the ecological environment, as well as to develop broad-based community participation in the process of development. If we do not have broad-based community participation, then sustainability will become a very difficult task. Some of the tools that we'll be using for rural survey are as identified in your notes here. That will include what we call the village monograph. The village monograph basically portray the overall scenario in the villages, and then they are non-intensive in nature. Here, the researcher would simply conduct a study of the village life and write up narratives on the villages as they exist and operate. Then there is also the observation. You can collect data through observation. One of the most basic and essential methods of data collection is this observation. It helps in making the researcher understand the occurring as well as recurring phenomena all by himself. Now, there are two types of observation that we want you to pay attention to. There is the participant observation and the non-participant observation. Why the participant observation um, has to do with the researcher himself getting himself involved in the entire process with the village. The non-participant observation, the researcher doesn't participate in any of the activities and behaves like an outsider. And that's what that we may use for data collection in rural studies, in rural survey, is the interview. In the interview, we have what we call the interview schedule, which can come in the form of a questionnaire or other forms of discussions like the key informant system. We can use the key informant to do that. We can do the focus group discussion. Then the case studies is a deeper and intensive study of a village done through case studies. By conducting case studies, the researcher tries to find out any unique occurrence in the village that stands out from the rest of the findings. It helps in throwing insights into the main study or the body of the work. This is what we call it today for this particular lecture series. We want to thank you again. Make sure you take time to make your notes.